It reminds me very well of one of the many teachings and lectures of Bishop Fulton Sheen, where he speaks on communists, where he says all communists know is how to do is down, tear everything down, down
Exactly.
with the state, down with the church, down with authority, down with hierarchy. And he says, well, on the other hand, you have like Catholicism that says up, as like up with the common good, up with man, up with our advancements, up with our society, up to an appeal to heaven, to God. And that's something I always found to be very touching, showing the differences of them.
Exactly, and that fits exactly into how integralism relates to the other general ideologies of the world. All other ideologies are inherently materialist. They look down to the earth and they say, what can I do with this? What can I do to make myself in a better position with what I have below me? Integralism looks above. We look to God. We look to Him for what we can ask of Him and what we can do for Him while we are here. So integralism inherently is serving God. It is looking up, while all materialist ideologies are just looking down and wanting to bring everything down.
What might I do with the world given to me to please my Creator?
Exactly.
No, definitely, and I agree with that. And I was bringing up the McCarthy Red Scare stuff earlier. I know it's disputed whether these actions were good or bad. I lean towards more of the negative for McCarthy, because he did persecute a lot of Catholics and a lot of Catholic organizations who he branded as being communists. As we all know here, we have a very rich history of being rivals and trying to fight back the wave of communism.
Indeed. And you see in another papal encyclical, I believe by Pius XI, though I might be mistaken on that one.
You're correct, it's the 11th.
Quadragesimo Anno, which is inherently a statement again. It's more modernized to the I believe it was 30s at the time when it was released, and it is openly against the biggest growing ideologies, and this is why the Vatican was fairly neutral during the Cold War, though they did lean to the US a little bit. It's because they said both communism and capitalism, both the authoritarianism of Russia and the US, are harmful. They are not leading toward a godly society. Both are simply looking inwards for what they want from themselves, not from what they can do for God. And so Quadragesimo Anno, it addresses all of these more modern variations of what was growing in the 1890s with Leo XIII, and it is really a succinct sequel to Rerum Novarum and perfectly encapsulates the church's moral position on this. And those two documents particularly were the base of modern Catholic moral teaching, which is what we follow dogmatically.
Okay, sounds nice. Going on to the next question I have for you guys lined up. Could you explain what encapsulates monarchism and the specific form the American Royalists would be advocating for?
Yeah, absolutely. So what differentiates monarchism? So a lot of people will look at monarchy and say that's just dictatorship. There's differences. There's small differences and big ones, but the difference inherently between monarchy and any other system, number one, is inheritance. We want a monarch who is the son of the previous. We want a monarch who spent his life learning how to rule. Because governing a society is much like any other trade, in that it takes time to learn. And in our modern political system, in the US particularly, our heads of state have 4 years, maybe 8, if they win re-election, to learn how to rule. But they're given full authority the second they're elected. But they still have to learn. This simply doesn't work. If you put inexperienced people in position for short periods of time and expect them to just be able to do it like that, they're going to fail. And that's what democracy does. Look at our current president. You'd think someone who had been in government since before my parents were born would know a thing or two about running a nation, yet he has run us into the ground. So monarchy is inheritance. If you teach your son to rule a nation for you, if you teach him what effective leadership is, if you show him how to submit to Christ and how to serve your people, he will be an infinitely better ruler than any democratically elected individual. Then, addressing the second point, tradition. Monarchy inherently ascribes to tradition, and you'll see this very often with elaborate court rituals and elaborate old titles. and things that just, like, for example, in England, when the king is seated on the Stone of Scone, I think it's called, most people have no idea what the purpose of this is. But these traditions are what keep a monarchy grounded in the nation. It's what keeps them with the people. It's this tradition. And this is what differentiates it from dictatorships. If we want to address the worst dictator to have probably lived recently, that's not a communist, look to Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was based in no tradition. He was based in no particular care for the past. He only cared about one thing, and that was the idea of the Aryan race succeeding over everything else. He saw no purpose in sticking to tradition. He used to be a communist. His only care was for whatever was best for him and his people, and not for what is best for God and for everyone. He only cared about himself, and this is why he failed. This is why dictatorships fail. Dictatorships are just doing whatever. Kings follow traditions. Kings make sure to establish themselves with their people. Kings succeed. Dictators do not. Monarchy, and there are three forms, as you were asking us to describe kind of what we generally lean toward, what kind of monarchy. We are generally against what is known as constitutional monarchy or ceremonial monarchy. This is a monarchy where the king has little to no power. They are essentially a figurehead. This kind of monarchy will not do. We do not argue monarchy for aesthetics. We argue monarchy for effectiveness. So if we were to argue simply for a figurehead monarch, our arguments would be null and void and would make no sense. There are two other forms of monarchy which generally our membership team tends to lean between, but these two other forms are called either semi-constitutionalism, which is also just known as a half-and-half monarchy, and then absolutism. A semi-constitutional monarchy is where a king will split power in some percentage, 50-50, 60-40, 75-25, some percentage, with an elected body. Some people see this as a possible way for running a government, though our leadership generally does not, and we do not lean in that direction. We lean toward an absolute monarchy. This is where a king is the authority, where all authority comes from the king, and all the authority of the king comes from God. So this authority that the king has, he then basically issues downward, almost like a waterfall, and from there his authority basically goes to so-and-so, 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 and so-and-so to do what he says, but the ultimate authority is him. No one can overrule him, except for God, of course, but God acts in mysterious ways, as we know. So an absolute monarchy. And a lot of people think when we say absolute monarchy, we mean a highly centralized government. An absolute monarchy doesn't have to be highly centralized. It just has to have one person who is the highest authority. In fact, examples of highly decentralized, authoritarian, absolute monarchies, one of the greatest examples of this was the Ancien Regime in France, or the Ancient Regime. This was particularly from Louis XIV to Louis XVI. Louis XIV, he was an absolute monarch. As he said, he was the state. But France was very decentralized. Every different region in France had their own traditions, their own rights. Certain regions were allowed to do certain things, others weren't. And this is because he realized that a nation would work better if local traditions were respected just as national ones were. So generally, the American Royalists does lean toward absolute monarchy.
All right, and a follow-up question to that, either of you guys could take this, but how would that envision a relationship between the monarch and the people in a modern royalist society? And how would you ensure the accountability of representation to avoid, let's say, the Mad King, if you will? Obviously, like we already stated earlier, it's hard and rare to come by, but it's still a possibility. Would you consider to have like a hereditary one almost make a ruler feel power hungry and inclined to that position compared to him like earning it by merit?
So, firstly, to address the first part, the relationship between king and people. Very simply, as I stated earlier, the king is a father to his nation. He is to listen to his people, like a father might listen to his child, and hear their complaints, what they believe needs to be changed, and he'll listen to this. And the primary way he does this is by way of his advisors, though sometimes the king will just listen directly to what the people have to say. And in our modern society, he can read what they're saying. He can go online and see what people are saying. He could read the news. So the king, firstly and foremostly, would simply just hear what his people have to say. But, as a father does, he would likely know what is better